Okay, I think we're ready to roll, Lydia, with recording. Move that.
Great, let's get started.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on putting the plan to use, grant applications. We're going to try to make this an exciting hour about grant applications. We'll see how successful we are with that. So I'm Jake Claro. I'm the Farm to Plate director, and joined by my colleague Sarah Danley, who's the Farm to Plate network manager. And we're going to be your fearless guides through this webinar today. So as I said, just if you didn't hear, if you're just rolling in, put your name, affiliation, preferred pronouns into the chat. Make sure that chat is that the to tab is selected as all panelists and attendees, so that it's going to everyone and not just Sarah, Lydia, and I. So first off, I just wanted to quickly give ourselves a sense of actually how this roughly 55 minutes is going to go. So what I'm going to do is give kind of a brief overview about the plan itself, because that will kind of provide a lot of context for then what Sarah is going to be touching upon and using the plan for grant applications. Some of you may have seen me give this presentation before, but I think it'll be a nice reinforcement if I'm being consistent with what I say to what I've said in the past. And then for those of you who haven't seen this, it'll just be a good way in which to understand the different parts and pieces of the plan at a very kind of basic level, and then in turn it'll help everyone kind of follow along to the examples that Sarah's going to be using for grant applications. So about the plan, which will also include kind of some points about what's actually in it. And we'll have some Q&A, kind of a halftime break when we're through with that, just clarifying questions about it. And then the second half, roughly, will be actually using the plan for grant applications with some really great examples that Sarah's going to be walking through, and some period for Q&A with that as well. So that's our arc. And I think knowing that this is part of a series, but the biggest message that we want to start with is this is your plan, and it's for you to use. And so that's kind of the underlying philosophy of these webinars, is really kind of empowering all of you to have confidence to use this plan in various ways in your work, because it's reflective of the work that you do. It's we think hopefully supportive of the work that you do, and so that's what this series is all about, is really kind of giving you that ability to see the different ways in which you can use it. And so this one is on grant applications. We will be having one on research and education, and then after the session ends, sometime maybe in the summer-ish, we'll have one around policy advocacy, which is going to also set up some conversations about how we address policy in the network itself. And just to know that you can contact myself or Sarah and Lydia as well if you want more info about the network. It's just our name at vsjf.org. And of course, also you can sign up for our e-lists at vtfarmtoplate.com. Know that the groups that we have kind of in our current network, because of this new plan, are going to be changing, but those listservs will be used to communicate those changes and to make those transitions. So those are great listservs to be on and communicate through. And they will still be active, but maybe in a slightly different form as the network changes. And the other thing I'll just say about this grant applications webinar is that Sarah and I, we do a lot of letters of support. We also serve on various grant committees. We have in the past, we do now, and we've also written a lot of grants ourselves and been a part of that process. So just to let you know that we are bringing some direct experience on this topic, and so hopefully take that take that for what it is, but we're speaking from that experience. We're not the authorities, but certainly we have, I think, we've learned a lot over the years, and that's what we're going to be really trying to share with you today. So just quick kind of backstory on the plan. Vermont is a state that has a plan, and we had a plan. Actually, the first plan 10 years ago, that was when the first plan kind of came into being, the Farm to Plate Strategic Plan, and that was actually signed into law in 2009, and then was released in 2011, and then in 2019, due to a lot of the success that was seen in the first plan, it was Farm to Plate as a program was reauthorized, and because of that, there was this need to update the first strategic plan for the next decade. And so that's what this new plan represents, is kind of the second iteration of our statewide food system plan. And I think just with that too is knowing that this is a plan that the legislature asked for, and so that's already kind of I think a key element of today's webinar, is that it's something that they pay attention to. They want to see connections to what you're doing and also what you may be proposing to do. And so, the plan is a strong reference point for them. And it's something that also, we're accountable to reporting to them on. They want to see progress on the various elements. And so that's just, I think, good context for today as well. And of course, just the three legislative outcomes of this that's in the legislation that kind of defines the plan in many different ways, which I'll touch upon a little more. So the three outcomes: increasing sustainable economic development, creating jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector, improving soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change, and then improving access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters. So those are the three kind of overarching outcomes that the legislation provides, basically, as to what the plan is meant to achieve. So a little more about just kind of the input and contributions that went into this plan, that it's not just it's not just Farm to Plate or VSJF or the Agency of Agriculture, that there was a lot of input and contributions made by people working in farming and food. So we have these 54 food system product market and issue briefs, which included over 110 contributors. And they, in each of those briefs, were making 5 recommendations, or some of them maybe a little more than that, or a little less. In turn, those briefs then we used to have a number of producer focus groups, where those groups then looked at the recommendations, they prioritized them, they set targets for growth that further informed kind of information that was then utilized in the plan. Our various network working groups and cross-cutting teams had conversations about this, about the plan, and kind of helped provide input to various aspects of it. We also had a statewide public survey, over 1,100 responses, and over, or roughly 14% of those responses came from farmers. So all of that information then came to kind of the writing team, which included staff at VSJF, staff at the Agency of Agriculture, and Farm to Plate network leadership was kind of involved at different points in time of helping craft language and vet what was being put together in the plan. So that's why we also say, like, this is your plan, because it's really coming from a broad spectrum of people who are doing this work, and our job was to take all of that input, content, feedback, and put it into this document. And just this is an old graphic that I pulled, but Sarah and I wanted to just impress upon everyone that when we talk about the food system, and maybe where you are in the food system, and how you might see yourself in this plan, like the food system we're talking about everything. It's holistic. So likely whatever you are doing in the food system, whether it is farming or something with food security or education, to composting, that you're included in this. So there are ways in which you can identify and find points of connection with the plan and use that to support your work and support to strengthen your grant applications. Okay, so what is actually in the plan? As I said, there's these 3 legislative outcomes, and if you think of the plan, this is an imperfect metaphor, but or analogy, but the plan is kind of like this prism that takes those 3 legislative outcomes and converts them and imbues those outcomes into a vision, goals, objectives, priority strategies, and then the product, market, and issue brief recommendations. So that you kind of treat this as the vision, kind of is that expressing what we want to see in 10 years. The goals are the signposts along the way. The objectives are these measurable improvements that are kind of indicators of whether or not we're going in the right direction. The priority strategies are those approaches, policies, programs, etc., that we think are going to help get us there. So not quite at like the tactical level. And then the product, market, and issue brief recommendations are basically the more granular actions to take that feed into those priority strategies. The priority strategies are kind of a synthesis in many cases of a number of recommendations that are made in those briefs. So those are the key components that you'll find in the plan. And as it relates to the goals are categorized to correspond with the 3 legislative outcomes. And then we've also added a category for racial equity because it's not something that's explicitly in those outcomes, but is very much an important commitment for us to be making, and an area that we need to be mindful of, and it's part of our part of what we need to accomplish in the 10-year time frame of the plan. So those goal categories they're color coded. So the economic the economic development category, which is purple, corresponds to that first outcome of increasing sustainable economic development. The green, environmental sustainability, corresponds to that second outcome. And then healthy local food for all Vermonters is the third. And then that blue dot for racial equity. So those are the categories. So if you see purple, think economic development. If you see green, think environmental sustainability, et cetera. And so here, I'm not going to read these off, but just so here are the actual goals, which you'll find in the plan with their, under their color-coded banner. So there are 5 of these economic development goals. There are 4 environmental sustainability goals in the green. And then there are another 5 healthy local food for all Vermonter goals. And then there's the racial equity goal. So that's just a way to kind of quickly identify the goals by category, by those color, in that color scheme. And then another, I think, important thing to know, this is in the objectives. As I said, the objectives are kind of these these measurable improvements that we want to see. So that by nature includes what will include data and kind of data collection by us and analysis over time. And this is also something to think about. We know from past experience, because we have data on our website now, that this data then is helpful for grant applications. If you're trying to kind of, whether it's paint kind of the macro picture of why something matters or why there needs to be something done about something, data is oftentimes a nice complement to making the case. And so just to know that on our website we have this data that's available to use, and we can help interpret or answer questions about it. And yeah, just know it's there for you to utilize and pull from, and is we've heard is a valuable kind of resource in this grant application process. And that's again kind of the objectives we'll cover in the plan. The objectives are kind of covering this data component. And here's an example of in the plan, you'll find all of the individual briefs in the appendix. And so here's an example of what one of those looks like. So they're 2 to 4 pages, kind of stating current conditions, bottlenecks, opportunities, recommendations, with some data as well. And so those are, if you're coming at it from a very specific like content area, or if you're interested in a very specific, part of the food system, the briefs is a good starting place, and then you can kind of work your way up in the plan, as it were. And so there's also these 34 priority strategies, and these are not in priority order. And what you'll see is that each priority strategy also includes a symbol that has the number in that circle is the goal that strategy is kind of impacting or meant to influence, and then it's color coded. So number 1 is addressing goals 1, 3, 6, and 8. Those are the economic and environmental categories. And so also just knowing that these 34 priority strategies are a distillation of the recommendations that are being made in the briefs. And I'll show you a table kind of to how that breaks out. And these span, all parts of the food system. So I won't show all 34, but you'll be able to find, identify probably the work that you're doing with any number of these. And also just know that, as you see, there's a reference to pages 193 and 200. There's this table of priority strategies with source reference. And what that means is that, as I said, the priority strategy is a synthesis of recommendations from the briefs. So this shows you actually kind of what that synthesis involves. So there's this priority strategy of the 1.5 million annually for working lands. That comes from, there are 4 actually recommendations in 4 separate briefs that kind of feed into the need for this 1.5 million annually. So there's multiple briefs making that recommendation that we then put into one priority strategy. And that is also reflected in number 10 in all cases. So this table kind of breaks down how the relationship there. And so you could also kind of find a recommendation in a brief, try to identify what priority strategy it relates to, and again kind of build your way back up into the plan to kind of connect it to the priority strategy and the goals. So this is just another way to kind of enter into the plan and find these connections. And so if you're wondering where to find all of this material is on our website at vtfarmtoplate.com/plan. You can sort of access this in many different forms. So there's the complete document, there's a smaller file that I believe it does not include all of the individual briefs, but it does have that the priority strategy and source reference table in it. And then also that table is available just as a separate individual download. And then you can also separately download and read all of the briefs. So if that's sort of how you want to enter in or make a quick kind of quick reference, you can do that by individually accessing the briefs. And look at this, we're moving pretty swiftly. So we're at halftime Q&A. We can spend about 5 or so minutes if people have clarifying questions. And so if there are questions at this point that folks have, you can post those. Let me stop the share. Stop the share. So we do have the Q&A. So you can type those into the Q&A or the chat, whatever's easiest. Not seeing any. No questions?
If it's easier, people can also raise their hand and we can allow you to
Yeah,
ask a
talk.
question out loud too.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a long one that's hard to type.
Yeah. Yes, I think if you go to the the participant panel, you can raise your hand. Yeah. Also, another thing that might be helpful is if you don't have any questions, if you want to just say no questions into the chat. Okay, we do have a question from Rob. When will the next updates of the stats happen? So we are in the process of doing that, Rob, for kind of this year, and then in doing that, we will kind of set up a schedule for when those updates will happen for particular data points, data sources. So we'll have more to share on sort of what that looks like. Some things we'll do, because data is available on an annual basis, we'll do that on an annual basis. Things like the census obviously is kind of on a 5-year track. And then there's some things where we're going to be doing some unique, our own surveying, which might happen on a every other year basis or every 3 years or something like that. So there's going to be dependent on the objective and the data sources that feed into that. It will vary, but our hope is to kind of revamp the data in the next like 6 to 8 months. So keep an eye out, and there'll be further developments on that. All right. So Sarah, whenever you're ready, I think it's good to go.
Yep. Do you want to share your screen again? I don't have mine set up in presenter view. Great, thanks, Jake. All right, so moving into actually using the plan for grant applications. As we've been emphasizing, creating this plan has been a collective effort, and it's really meant to show how all the various pieces that all of our food system organizations and businesses hold fit together so that we can more strategically pull together in the same direction. In other words, the work that you're already doing is advancing the goals of the plan. So articulating that and articulating how your work is advancing the plan can really help you in grant applications. Since it's your plan, you can feel free to use it in support of your own work however you would like. You don't need our permission. But we did also want to make clear that if you want to talk with us about it, we're happy to chat with you about how it might relate, help you sift through the different elements of the plan and see which connections you might be able to draw. Jake, next slide, please. So a couple of reasons why to consider using the plan for grant applications. Some grant applications will ask for it. For example, the specialty crop block grant application has a question asking you to look at the goals of the farm to plate plan and articulating how it relates. But there's a lot of reasons, even with applications that don't specifically ask for that. It can lend credibility if you can make the case that the issue that you're addressing fits within the issues identified by this collective process. That adds weight to the importance of your project. Review committees are also looking for a really quick way in reading the application materials to understand how your project is strategic and where it fits into the bigger picture. So especially when you take into account pretty tight word count limits in grant applications, referring to farm to plate goals can be a really convenient shorthand to express where your project fits in the broader strategic efforts of Vermont's food system. Referencing can also show that you've done your research on existing initiatives. It proves to the reviewers that you are aware of other work that's happening out there and that there is still a need for your project. And understanding where your project fits in the plan can help provide you with ideas for additional benefits you could provide beyond your core goal. Maybe as you're looking through the plan, you realize that it's actually working towards a goal that you hadn't yet incorporated into the language about why your project isn't important. Next, please. So in the process of applying for grants, there's two main places where you could reference the plan. The first is in letters of support. So as Jake mentioned, he and I write a lot of letters of support, and we're always happy to provide one for your project. It does really help for us to have a draft from you, especially when there is a really quick turnaround. That said, we'll also be providing you with a template, including our basic language and places for you to fill in, which we can then review and get that turnaround to you pretty quickly. The other place, of course, is in the application itself, in the grant narrative. And we're going to go into a few examples. Most of the examples were pulled from grant application narratives, but the examples that we're going to go over could easily be applied to either letters of support or to the application answers. Go ahead, Jake. So getting to the meat of the question, how do you actually refer to the plan in your grant applications? Regardless of whether you're using it in a letter of support or in the application itself, the first step is to think about your audience, their relationship to the food system, and what level of elevation they might care about the plan at. For example, funders who are less in the weeds on the food system, if they're a related system or work in the food system but at a very high level or in a certain piece of it, they may be more interested just in learning about how your project fits into the higher levels of the farm to plate plan, just to know that your project fits into a broader puzzle where there's momentum and there's widespread support. If you're speaking to a funder who's very in the weeds on the food system or very targeted to the same specific issues or segments of the food system that your project is addressing, they may want to know in more detail about how your project relates to priority strategies or to the briefs on that specific topic. In other words, to know that your project has been identified by the plan as the solution to the problem in question. Next, Jake. So in thinking about the audience, there's a few different messages you could convey to that audience depending on who you're speaking to. And we'll go through an example of each one of these types of messages. So is your best strategy in referring the plan to cite to the plan for background information? Or are you making the case that your project is working towards the farm to plate goals? Maybe you're articulating how your project is actually one of the priority strategies or recommendations from a specific brief. Or maybe it's actually about expressing partnership and collaboration with the network itself as part of your project work plan. We'll go into examples of each of these. So I'm not going to read all of these examples out loud word for word, but we will pause on each of them for a few minutes to give you time to read and digest the information presented in them. So here's an example of that first category, citing to the plan for background information. So this is from the Specialty Crop Block Grant application question that asks you to describe the context for your project and the specific issue, problem, or need your project will address. And as you can see, this answer cites to the product brief that was developed on hops. And I'll awkwardly pause to give people time to read through the examples themselves. All right, this is a bit of a shorter one, so I think we're good, Jake. An example of the second sort of messaging strategy, making the case that your project is working towards farm to plate goals. This one refers to how the project helps address a number of strategic goals, and in this case, they had enough space in the answer to actually copy out the full wording of each of those goals. And we do recommend citing to, no more than 5 goals. We say 3 to 5, even just referring to 1 or 2 is still helpful. referring to too many might feel overwhelming, or like you're sort of throwing things at the wall to see what might stick. And I think 3 to 5 is the sweet spot where you're showing that it works towards a lot of goals simultaneously, but that you're being really thoughtful about which ones it's most directly addressing. All right, next example, please. Oh, sorry, that's a little bit blurry. So this is an example that actually sort of combines those first two categories. This is talking about how the problem was identified within the Farm to Plate strategic plan, and also then transitioning to making the case that therefore this project is addressing those goals. And it refers to the briefs as well, to point people towards more background information about specific elements of the project. All right, we're good, Jake. So in the third bucket of messaging types, articulating how the project is one of the priority strategies or recommendations from a specific brief. This example does both of those. You can see in the first paragraph, it says it's a concrete example of the models encouraged in priority strategy number 9. And then because there was space available in this document, it goes on to explain that that priority strategy references specific recommendations that are also addressed by this project.
Sorry, Sarah, just one thing I wanted to add to this example, because this is a case where that, that table, if you do have space to really get more specific, is that, you've got the priority strategy number 9, and then you could look at that table and identify those specific recommendations from certain briefs that you could include as reference material.
Yep. Yeah, and you can also use the table in reverse. So if you start by reading a brief that most closely relates to your topic and feel like your project really closely aligns with 1 or 2 of those recommendations, you can go to that same table and see which priority strategies encapsulate those recommendations and sort of work your way backwards from the brief to figuring out which strategy you should be referring to. Okay, next example, Jake. And here's the 4th bucket of messaging, which is not focused so much on the plan directly, but rather that the network can be a partner or a collaborator as you implement the work that you're applying for the grant for. So this is an example. It was actually an application to a healthcare world funder, and it was articulating that there already was a strong relationship with the Farm to Plate Health cross-cutting team, and that group was prepared to support the applicant in this intersectional work. And this is another place too, where obviously Jake and I are happy to chat with you about what the network is currently working on, where you might fit in, point you towards people that you might want to talk with about being potential partners. Really open to any conversations about how your work relates to the network. And the template language we'll be providing includes sample language, not just about the plan as a document, but about what the network is as well. So you'll be able to draw from that too. All right, I think we're good, Jake. Yeah, so we keep referring to this template language. As I said, that will be that's applicable for both letters of support or as a grant narrative. It will be available, posted as a resource on the Farm to Plate website, and we will be sending the link as a follow-up to this webinar. Jake, anything else to add on that note?
Yeah, so there'll be a couple of examples, so sort of templated examples of the things that Sarah has covered that are relatively plug and play, but you can kind of manipulate, or it gives you an idea for how to manipulate it for your particular need. And then, yeah, and then there'll be a kind of an example of a letter of support that you could basically, if you wanted to come ask us to do a letter of support, you could basically send us that document, filled out with specific project details. And then, Sarah and I will customize it and add our own kind of flourishes to the letter of support. But it really does help when we kind of get that letter of support with your kind of description of the project and your sense of how it connects to the plan, because it also helps, gives us confidence that, okay, like, you know what, you've done some homework on the plan, and you feel like these are the connections and the things that you want us to focus on as we're kind of writing it out. So that will also be a resource that we're going to include in this. And just the other thing too that I would say with letters of support is that knowing that, there's a lot of contributors who represent various organizations, who wrote the briefs, that they too in their letters of support might be able to use this type of language. So it's not just us, writing a letter of support and making these connections, but we would encourage, other people who are writing those letters of support, who have been involved in this process, they could use this language as well. So there's many different ways, I think, in which the templated language can be useful in this process, whether it is letters of support or the actual application content.
Great, and I think next, Jake, I think we're just moving on to Q&A. So as before, feel free to add questions, type them into the Q&A box, or raise your hand and we can keep an eye on that and let people speak as well.
Yeah, and so Janet was asking if we'll be emailing the template and outline for the reference letter to participants. Yes, so we have, by nature of registering, you provided your email, so we'll circulate that to those who have participated today, and then we will also post that content up to our website soon. We have on the website, there's a tab called resources, and in that, when you go to that page, there are these things called collections. And so we'll have a resource collection for this entire webinar series. So you'll be able to find this video recording, but also the supplemental materials, which would include the template language and the template kind of letter of support. Yeah, I was gonna thank you, Christina. Affirmations are great too. So if this has been very clear and like, okay, I get how to use it now and I've got some good ideas, that's great to hear. But if you do have any questions or clarifying questions.
I would add also, or if you have any ideas for how to use it that weren't really covered by our categories, we would love to hear that as well and sort of have your wisdom shared with the group too.
And just as either people are formulating questions or expressing thanks, yeah, thanks, Liz. The affirmations are great. Yeah, and as Sarah said, definitely, like, we're not the gatekeepers here. We're not expecting you to ask for permission. But if you do have questions about, like, I think I'm thinking this project like has a connection here, we're more than happy to, obviously answer those types of questions, or, review something just to provide further confirmation of like, yeah, that's right. And maybe you could include this too. So if it's not a letter of support, we're always happy to kind of help answer those very specific questions about, if you're in the process of writing the grant.
So we had a question in the Q&A box from Jen. Since grant proposals often ask for in-kind support, is there any sort of mechanism across the network for gathering match between various partners? Seems like a matching pool could be really helpful. So Jake, I'm interested to hear your answer to this too. We don't have a very formal mechanism for that, but there have certainly been projects that are very closely aligned with network groups, and that the network group has a discernible role to play in the project, even just as a communication channel. And I have seen projects where we can add up that time from the group to contribute towards the match.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Sarah, I think you covered it well. And I think also, Jen, you might be on to something that we could consider of, yeah, kind of how to articulate that match in ways that this matching pool kind of concept, I like that. And there was, yeah, question about, do we have a list of open grants or grants coming up? We do not at the moment, but this was something that has come up in our staff conversations of, yeah, just knowing these grant cycles. And, the agency, I think, has a schedule that, they have available on their website, but it is something we've talked about as something we might be able to include like in our newsletter, as for example, because we are kind of aware of various grant sources and their relative schedules. Sometimes it's hard because they change. They're not always exact year to year. Like I know NRCS and federal stuff can sometimes shift depending on when funds are released, or budget, whether or not they're receiving money still. But that is something that we've given some thought to, and I hope we will have a way in which to convey that kind of grant cycle, through Farm to Plate to our members. So thanks for that. Yes, and thanks, Christina, for including that link. Yeah, the agency has a great little, I think there's a PDF that they've got that lists all their programs and the grant cycles. I was hoping that it was going to be a nicer day so that if we ended early, we could say, get outside and enjoy the weather, but got a little cool and rainy, which actually we needed, but we'll give it one more minute for folks if they do have any questions that come up. All right. Awesome. Yeah, so we will be in touch with that templated content. Again, Sarah, myself, Lydia, we're here to help with questions, and yeah, some good ideas in terms of kind of grant cycle and matching pool, how we represent match through the network and how that could help in your application. So those are two nice takeaways for us as well. So thank you for those contributions.
Yeah, and I guess just remember to also stay tuned for the other ones in this series. So on how to use the plan for policy advocacy, and then how to use the plan for educational and research institutions.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, would you say the research institution one is, that'll probably be the next one, right?
Probably, but it hasn't been scheduled yet. but
Yeah,
it'll
so we don't have
probably-
firm dates, but yeah, stay tuned. All right, awesome. So thanks, thanks for taking the time, and hope this was helpful, and we'll be in touch. And be in touch with us.
Thanks, everyone.